Well, thank you so much. And first, of course, everyone will have 5 minutes this morning to ask questions of our witness. First, let me talk further, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned in your testimony that the single most important thing Congress must do amid the increasing popularity of crypto is to pass legislation that establishes federal oversight of non-security tokens. If Congress does not act to fill this regulatory gap, does any federal regulator have the authority to regulate the market for crypto assets like Bitcoin that are not securities?
Senator, thanks for the question. The short answer to the question is no. And I mean, this is really the reason we're here, and the problem is, and as you mentioned in your opening statement, if you measure the Bitcoin economy by market capitalization, upwards of 70 to 80% of the market are non-securities, which means there is no direct federal regulatory oversight. So despite what I think some may believe, this leaves this giant gap, this vacuum, and ultimately customers at risk for loss of money. And I think our enforcement record demonstrates that over the past better part of 10 years. And as you pointed out also in your statement, the problem with our enforcement authority, although powerful, it's reactive. We're never able to be on our front foot in this situation. We're always being responsive to tips, complaints from individuals who typically have been defrauded. Our typical regulatory framework involves registration and compliance with an existing set of rules, which gives the CFTC or any market authority the ability to look through a registered entity, whether it's a broker, an exchange, a custodian, or an individual participant. And those are the types of regulatory tools that enable us to really eliminate, if not reduce significantly, market fraud and manipulation. Anything else, which is the current state of play with crypto, again, is only reactive. So we have a very successful enforcement record, and one that I'm very proud of, and this committee should be too, but ultimately, we're only coming in after the fact, which means money is typically lost, we're not able to get money back to customers, and we're really not having that same deterrent effect that we should have if we had a robust, comprehensive regulatory regime.
Thank you. And could you talk a little bit more about the CFTC's experience protecting retail customers?
Sure. You know, we actually have, despite I think a little bit of a narrative that we don't have much of a retail-oriented market, certainly a huge part of our market is institutional and wholesale, as many of you know, significantly on the agriculture side and the energy side and the large financial institution side for interest rates and credit. But we do have a growing participant pool of retail investors in both futures. Many on this committee are familiar with prediction markets, which is a very retail-oriented market as well. So we do have a pretty robust pool of retail investors, and have so for many years. And I would also mention from an enforcement standpoint, despite some big-ticket enforcement cases against large institutions, which typically involve manipulation of markets or non-compliance, our entire fraud pool of enforcement, or at least a significant portion of it, is very much focused on retail investors. Unfortunately, retail investors fall prey to fraud around metals, gold and silver, which I'm sure many on the committee are familiar with. You see these in commercials or radio advertisements. And also Forex, which is foreign exchange, a very typical area where retail fraud occurs. So if you look at the CFTC's record in enforcement, the fraud is very much focused on retail, and that has enabled us to build a very strong Office of Customer Education and Outreach, and a very comprehensive program to get information to retail investors through the internet, social media, conferences, or other events to make sure they're aware of the risks associated with retail fraud in commodity markets.
Thank you. And finally, if we give the CFTC new authority to oversee the spot digital commodity market, we know that we need to ensure you have adequate funding and the resources to be able to do it, be able to do what we're asking you to do. And that is what part of what we are working on. But any fees will not be collected until the agency finalizes its rules and begins registering these platforms. So during the interim, how much do you anticipate would be needed in resources in terms of annual appropriations for you to set up the regulatory regime?
Thanks, Senator. We actually, and you alluded to this, there have been a number of efforts in Congress, both here in the Senate, including this committee, and in the House more recently, to produce bills around legislating authority for the CFTC. And in light of those efforts, over the course of 2 or 3 years, we've actually done a bit of a analysis at the agency regarding what we would need. So essentially responding to your question with some assumptions, of course, assumptions based on how many registrants we would have in the broker-dealer space, in the exchange space, in the custodian space. But with those assumptions, which I think is fair and informed based on what we see in the unregulated market, we've largely estimated that we would need somewhere between $50 to $60 million in a first year, and then $30 to $35 million in a second year, with a correlated number of full-time equivalent employees ranging from 100 to 50 to 75 in the first and the second year. We also have estimates for the third year, but we do have a fairly thorough analysis of what we would need in an interim, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 years, and we're happy to share that with the committee as it considers legislation.
Thank you so much. Senator Bozeman.